What's up everybody? My name is Zero and I'll be your host here to teach you about how to build your decks for the early game. So let's get started. Let's go over here to our decks. Currently I've got quite a few decks built, but I've got one slot here that I'm going to get rid of. So now we've got an open deck slot. Let's go ahead and choose a deck. Let's see, who should we build a deck for? Let's pick someone relatively easy. Let's go for Chimera. So you can see I've got a couple of decks already built, but let's not focus on that. Let's just get right into building a brand new deck farm. Each deck will have to have a prime card. The prime cards activate their passives only once your team activates or prime in the game. So for Chimera, let's go ahead and get some power. So we'll take the Archmagus prime card. Now, building decks is pretty easy. You can pretty much build a character however you want. You can put in whatever cards you want, but you should know that you can only have a total of 40 cards, including upgrade cards, in your deck. So, if we take that into consideration and we understand that the most card power that you can have in the game is 60, and you only have 6 slots to put these cards in, you could have 6 10-point cards or a couple variations of 12-point cards, 10-point cards, 6-point cards, whatever. You can build the deck however you want. This video is not to showcase the optimal build or how you should build Chimera or any other hero. This is really just to show you how to build your deck for the early game to give your character a little bit of an advantage, to help push the towers, to help in team fights, to help keep you alive and deal as much damage to your enemies, so that way you can push those objectives, you can take those towers, and hopefully get you that win. So let's get started. The first card that we want to put in this deck as being Chimera, since we're a jungler, is going to be this Guardian Scythe here. So we're going to get this card and we're going to go ahead and put on 3 1-point minor casts. So as a jungler with Chimera, this Guardian Scythe is going to give us some power to start off with and some health, and it's also going to give us bonus damage on the minions inside the jungle. This means we'll be hitting them a little bit harder and we'll be able to clear those camps a little bit faster, which will help us rotate into our lanes to help our teammates and help push those towers and even defend them. So next, we're definitely going to want a ward, so we can definitely go ahead and take, where are you at? For Chimera, we're going to go ahead and take this Guardian's Ward. So with this Guardian's Ward, we're going to put on 2 2-point casts and a 1-point minor cast. So for now, the point value for this isn't really super relevant, but this is going to be a 9-point card. So we've got 3 points to place the card, 2 points in the cast, another 2 points in the cast, which brings us to 8 to 7. I can't do math. And then the 1-point minor cast. So this is going to be 5 points here and then 3 points here to then bring us to 8. You're going to have to excuse me. Math is definitely not my strong suit. So now we've got our ward here. We've got our scythe for the jungle, wards for vision. Wards should be in every single deck you have, whether you're the mid lane, the jungle, the off lane, the support for sure, or even the carry. At least for the early game, you should for sure have wards to make sure that your team has the vision necessary to either escape from a gank or to see enemies rotating so you know when to pull out from a lane. But that's a whole nother subject, so let's get back into this deck build. So for Chimera, we are going to take an Elder Mage Amulet. We're going to put on 2 minor casts and a lesser health, That'll make this a 6-point card. It'll give us a little bit of damage to help us in the early game, and a little bit of bonus health to make sure that we're surviving these fights long enough to either secure the kill or make sure our team can rotate over and help us out. For the early game, we're actually going to build another Elder Mage Amulet that'll give us 2 minor casts and a lesser health. Again, this is going to give us some extra survivability, make sure we're staying in these fights, and some damage to make sure we're hitting the enemies hard and dealing as much damage as possible. So with this amulet here, we're going to have 200 health on it. It's going to give you 100 for the fully upgraded bonus, and then 50 initially to start, and then another 50 health here. So that's going to be 200 points of health for this Elder Mage Amulet, and another 200 points for this second Elder Mage Amulet. So you're going to have a total of 400 extra health built right off the bat in your early game, right alongside your damage that you're dealing coming from your Guardian Scythe, both amulets, and even your Guardian's Ward. Each of these is also going to give you a little bit of health just to make sure that you're staying alive longer in these fights. Alright, so let's move into more damage here. Next thing we want, as we transition from the early game, we're going to move into, I would say it's a mid-game card. It's going to be a little bit more CP value. It's also going to give you some more damage to make sure you're hitting your enemies nice and hard. We're going to take this Adamant Edge, and for this, we are going to put 2 3-point major casts and a 2-point minor cast. Now for this card, you can build this in mid-game or in the late game. Typically for me, I like to save it for closer to the late game. But these 2 major casts will be 6 points. This Adamant Edge initial placement will be another 3 points, so that'll bring you to 9. And then the 2-point cast will bring you to 11 points totals. This will total to be an 11-point card. You can save that for the mid-game or for the late game. It's really up to you. It's a little bit situational, so just you want that kind of later. For the early game, Chimera is exceptional in close-range combat, but because of this, he can sometimes get overwhelmed with other fighters who are trying to fight back, or with people like casters who are throwing a lot of abilities at you. So for Kai, right now we're going to take this Toon Barrier. We're going to put on here 2 1-point lesser healths and 1 minor barrier. So this is going to give you a little bit of armor against those abilities. People like Gideon dropping the rock, maybe Gadget's Mine, Countess and her onslaught of abilities. This will protect you a little bit, and it'll give you a little bit of extra armor, and make sure that you're staying in these fights long enough to deal as much damage as possible. So, after you've got that built, we can move on to, let's say, more mid-game cards. Something along the lines of maybe a Hunter's Guile. So a Hunter's Guile will remove all debuffs from your hero. It's got a 120-second cooldown, but is well worth it when you're fighting someone like Aurora, who can freeze you in place, or freeze you and your entire team with her ultimate. So let's go ahead and take this, and on this Hunter's Guile, which will for sure be a mid to late game card, we're going to put on 3 major casts. That is going to bring this to a 13-point card. So we've got 3 major casts, that'll be 9 points, plus the 4 points for the initial placement, which brings you up to 13. So this is a pretty heavy card, it's very valuable, so this is definitely going to be a mid to late game card. You can place it early if you need it. If you find yourself fighting an Aurora who's being particularly troublesome, just don't go ahead and take those upgrades until sometime later, because you want to make sure that you're building for these upgrade bonuses first. So with that, we're going to take a pause right here, and I want to make sure to note that this is not about an optimal build for Chimera. This is just a build that I'm throwing together that will show you the difference between building for early game and late game. For early game, you want to prioritize maxing out your cards as quickly as possible to achieve their upgrade bonus. So for this Elder Mage Amulet, your upgrade bonus is going to be 100 extra health. And like I already did the math for you earlier, each of these Elder Mage Amulets is going to give you 200 extra health. And that's on top of the damage that we're already getting from them. So the damage, we're going to get 18 power right out of the card. We've got 6 for the initial placement, and then 6 for these 2 minor casts that we're throwing in. So that's going to give you 18 power and 200 health. Well worth it. It's going to keep you in the fight, it's going to give you the damage you need, and it's going to make sure that you're able to stay in long enough to help your team and push those objectives. So for the early game, the first card you want to buy is your Guardian Scythe. You can go ahead and upgrade that with your 1-point bonuses. You might want to get your ward next, and you can either upgrade your ward or you can save it, but you want to make sure that you're giving your team the vision around the map and placing your wards, that way they can avoid ganks, or you can see enemies rotating, so that way you can go in for a gank yourself. Then I would suggest building these Elder Mage Amulets, all with your 1-point upgrades. That way you're making sure to get that bonus health and the extra damage you need to keep fighting and also push those objectives. I can't stress enough how important it is to be able to push the objectives as much as possible. You don't want to overextend and blindly run into fights, but you do want the health and power necessary to stay in a fight long enough to either secure the kill or push for the objective. Sometimes you'll find yourself fighting for a tower and taking damage at the same time. If the tower is close enough to going down and you're tanking that damage, you want to make sure that you have enough health to stay in that to make sure to take that tower. Usually, taking a tower is worth taking the death. So if you can, take those towers and make sure that you're pushing for the win. Next, you can either build your Guardian's Wards upgrades if you didn't already, or you can move into building your Tune Barrier. Again, your Tune Barrier is going to give you a little bit of health and a little bit of armor against abilities to make sure that you can stay in the fights longer. You can then build your Adamant Edge or your Hunter's Guile, depending on the situation, and that will be the transition into the mid to late game. As you transition from early game into mid to late game, you'll start discarding some of these early game cards and move into the heavier, more valuable mid to late game cards. So if we put all of these in, we would have 1 slot, 2 slots, 3 slots, 4 slots, and 5 slots already taken, which means your 5th card slot will assuredly be a mid to late game card. You're not going to be discarding this card. So for me, I would put on my Hunter's Guile. I'll put on this Hunter's Guile, and I'll work on upgrading that, which will be my heaviest card, which is going to be the 13-point card in the mid game. It's also going to save me from a lot of debuffs like slows and roots. So next, now that we've reached this point, we're going to be building for the late game. We want something a little bit heavier than this Tune Barrier. So for me, I would go ahead and get a Tempered Plate. I'll take this Tempered Plate and I'll put on 3 Greater Guards. That'll give me a 12-point card with a ton of basic armor that's going to save me from other fighters. People who are trying to get in close and are starting to build heavy damage will have a harder time fighting against someone who's basically not taking as much damage as they're trying to deal. So I'll put on this Tempered Plate, which is going to be my 12-point card. And since I've put on this Hunter's Guile already, I'll have all 6 of my slots already taken up. So before I put on this Tempered Plate, I will remove this Tune Barrier and trade it for the Tempered Plate. This will take off a little bit of health, and a little bit of ability armor, but it will trade for a ton of basic armor, which is going to help in those close range fights against people who are building nothing but damage. So next, we want to keep building. Maybe I'm going to put on my Adamant Edge now, if I haven't already. Again, that's a mid to late game card, so it's kind of situational. You can put that on whenever you feel comfortable. For me, I'm going to scroll all the way down here, and I'm going to get this Thermal Bond. This is going to be an 8-point card, which is pretty expensive, but it's well worth it for someone like Chimera, and I'm going to upgrade it with a Greater Barrier. So this Thermal Bond, it does not have a fully upgraded bonus, so I might not really need to upgrade it all the way. See, I'm already going to get 100 health from it and 4 ability armor, and when I put on this Greater Barrier, I'll get 12 more ability armor. So right out the gate, I'm going to get 4. Once I upgrade it, I'm going to be up to 16 ability armor and 100 health, but I won't get anything from upgrading this any further. So I'm just going to leave this one upgrade on. I'll still have my passive, so I'll leave that on there, and that is going to make that an 11-point card. So late game, I might take off something like this Elder Mage Amulet, and I'll put on my Thermal Bond, so I'll only lose 100 health for that trade-off, but I'll gain more in ability armor. So that will help me stay in fights, and especially when it comes down to crowd control, which people like Chimera are very susceptible to. If I'm jumping into a fight and someone hits me with a stun or a root, maybe a knock-up from someone like Bellica, then the Thermal Bond is going to activate. The Thermal Bond's passive is going to heal me for 12% of my max HP over 4 seconds after being hit by a stun, root, or a knockup. So, if someone like Decker hits me with a stun, I'm going to start healing for any damage that I've already taken, up to 12% for 4 seconds. This is especially more effective since I've already built more health into this deck. Something like the Elder Mage Amulet, which will already still be on the character. So, I'll remove one Elder Mage Amulet, I'll put on this Thermal Bond, and now I've got a nice passive which will heal me whenever I get stunned, rooted, or knocked up. And I've got this Hunter's Guile which will help me get out and away from that kind of CC and make sure that I'm healing while absorbing damage with my Tempered Plate. Obviously this is helping me stay alive, it's increasing my survivability, and it's making sure that I'm staying in these fights long enough for my team to collapse and my team to come help me, or to stay in the team fight and make sure that we're pushing for those objectives. So, if we're talking about late game, right now I'm going to have built this Guardian's Ward, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is an 8-point card. We've got a Tempered Plate, which is a 12-point card. We've got a Hunter's Guile, which is a 13-point card, and this Thermal Bond, which is an 11-point card. So now we've got 44 total points in these cards, and we've still got one Elder Mage Amulet on, and maybe this Guardian Scythe if we haven't already switched that for something else. Maybe instead of taking off an Elder Mage Amulet, I'll take off the Scythe instead, and I'll put on the Thermal Bond. So I'll still have both of these amulets on. Again, it doesn't matter, I'm not trying to tell you how, to build the best build for Chimera or anybody else. It's just to show you how to transition from your early game into your late game. So the last card we're going to place is going to be, let's see here. Let's scroll up, maybe something like this Fire Piercer. So for this Fire Piercer, we're actually not going to put on any upgrades. It's an active card, so we're not going to get anything out of fully upgrading it. So for 10 seconds, your next basic attack on an enemy hero will shred 45% of their ability armor for 4 seconds. This is very good on someone for like Chimera who you want to get through the enemy armor if they're building any armor, and make sure you're dealing as much damage as possible. And obviously we've already built health, we've already built some armor, we have power built, so this Fire Piercer is going to help us get through any enemies who are building armor to make sure we're still hitting them as hard as possible. So for the end game, like I said, we've got this Guardian's Ward, we've got this Tempered Plate, a Hunter's Guile, a Thermal Bond, and now we'll add this Fire Piercer for 5. And at the end, we have this Adamant Edge, which is also an 11-point card, which will bring you to a total of 60 card power. So to end off, that will be your end game build. And remember, your early game is going to be this Elder Mage Amulet, this Elder Mage Amulet, this Guardian Scythe, this Guardian's Ward, and your Toon Barrier. Now the most important thing is to always remember that you want those upgrade bonuses right out the gate for your early game. This is going to help you stay in those fights, to help you deal as much damage as possible, and to help you push those objectives early to give your team an advantage. Now again, this is just a build that I put together for him. This is not about the most optimal build for Chimera. This is not about how he should be built or anything like that. This is just a build that I have for him, one that works for me, and one that ultimately helped me get those wins in PvP and help make me a better player with someone like Chimera. So, if you find this video helpful and you like what you see, please feel free to drop a like here on the video, subscribe to my channel, check out more of my videos, and I'll see you next time.